Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on SEO strategy. Today, we'll be having a discussion on everything SEO. We will get into our topics, but first, I want to thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you guys joining us and hearing what we have to say about SEO so that we can all gain our knowledge together. New North is here to help you, and we will give you some information throughout this presentation, but also at the end so that you can ask any questions you like. Let's meet the panelists. So we will have Tobin Lehman and Jacob Brain. And for today's agenda, we will be going over the top 10 questions that we get asked about SEO, as well as our prediction for the future of SEO. Some quick rules of the webinar. Please use the chat box for submitting your questions. And at the end, there will be a feedback form. Please provide some feedback to us so that we can improve our webinar experience. It only takes about 2 minutes. All right. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Question number 1. So question number 1 of the top 10 questions that we get asked. Once you have a website, what is the number one thing you should do to immediately improve your rankings?
This is a question we get a lot. Oftentimes, clients will come to us and they just spent a bunch of money building a website, and then they come in and they're like, all right, so now what? And I think sometimes it's a little bit backwards. It's kind of like saying you have the equipment, now you can get started. And so I think the big step in this is you still need to take the exact same approach that you would take if you didn't just build your website. And that's not fun news to hear, but at the end of the day, having a new website doesn't give you better SEO. Having a well-built website gives you good SEO, or having a website that was built with specific keywords in mind gives you good SEO. And so the newness of the website is kind of irrelevant, unfortunately. And so I would give the exact same advice that I'd give someone that didn't just rebuild their website. And I would say, well, go back to the basics, right? Did you do the appropriate keyword analysis? Are you optimized around those? How's the technical backend look? And so that's kind of the answer we typically give, and that's just maybe the first step in that. But I would also say give it a quick audit. I think the best way to do that, and we're a little bit biased here, is to have someone that knows what they're doing, take a look at it and dive into the back end of it and talk with you about the strategy. But if you don't quite have that, a good first step is just to use some of the online auditors. So there's Neil Patel has a good one. There's SEO optimizer.com, I think it is a really good one. So that's at least the first conversation how I'd start that out.
Great. Thank you very much. Jacob, Tobin?
I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry, I was saying you couldn't even get 4 minutes into the webinar without selling. So there we go. Yeah, but in all seriousness, yeah, I mean, I appreciate your comments. I kind of approached it a little bit of a different light, but I mean, the same sentiment. I mean, SEO does not start when your website's done. It actually starts before you even build the website, right? So the question kind of presents an inverse in terms of how we would think. We actually would do website SEO strategy first, and then think about website kind of after that. But the biggest thing with this is a keyword strategy, which I think was what Jacob was getting to. Whether you've got a site now or not, going back to a strong keyword strategy is going to be your ranking scenario, right? So however you built the site, you may need to reorganize it based on your keyword strategy. But also there isn't, in this question, there's this immediate improve. There is no such thing as immediate improvement in SEO. Things take time, take some effort, but you can absolutely get the results you want from SEO, but you have to treat it like moving a ship. Like it's you make a turn and things start moving and you get there at some point. So whether you've launched a site or you're just starting or whatever, start today. It's like the old proverb, when is the best time to plant a tree, either 10 years ago or today. It's the same kind of idea here, and really focusing around your keyword strategy, what your main keywords are, secondary keywords, et cetera. And I know we're going to touch on that a little bit more here in the next questions.
Okay, we'll move on to question number 2. How do I find the best keywords, or how do I know where to put them?
I'll let you kick this one off, Tobin. I have a bunch of thoughts on it though.
Yeah, good. The general idea here about finding the best keywords, I'll break it into two sections. Keywords, I mean, they're everywhere in a sense, right? There's just, you can think of all kinds of keywords. We tend to break keywords into maybe three categories, if you would, one way of doing it, kind of top, middle, and bottom funnel keywords. Obviously, solution-oriented keywords would be kind of bottom of the funnel. So if it's, fiber optic router, if it's chipboard manufacturer, if it's IT service provider, those are all searches where someone has determined the solution they're looking for. That's typically bottom of the funnel. And that you can probably sit around the table and figure out, right? Like if people call you, maybe some associative things, not much research is needed. Middle of the funnel would be more kind of decision making. Maybe the problem is acute in some sense, like there's a level of, cybersecurity best practices, or maybe there's, cost calculations for certain kind of IT or best software for X issue. Those are all kind of middle funnel keywords. You can brainstorm on those. That's when you probably would get into like keyword trackers or like Google's keyword tool or SEMrush, and kind of trying to find additional associative keywords. And then top of the funnel is going to be more categorical, maybe less intent as well as you go higher. So your bottom of the funnel is very high intent. They know the solution they're looking for. Top of the funnel maybe more like, in a sense, what is fiber optic routers? What is a good IT firm? What is a cybersecurity policy? They tend to be less intent, more traffic generated. So usually we see when there's more intent versus less intent, the volumes are actually correlated as well. Less intent or more intent, less volume, less intent, higher volume in terms of keywords. So it's about using keyword strategies, using your own brainstorming, even talking to clients, things like there's many different ways to go about it. But Jacob, what do you want to throw on there?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Maybe even one level deeper than that, when people are asking, how do I find the best keywords? Well, the best keywords are going to be different for different types of businesses, but when I'm looking at them, I'm usually keeping in mind three different attributes. So you want to look at relevance to the business. That's kind of an obvious first one. You want to then look at search volume. So how many people are searching that specific topic, and then the level of competition. And so the relevance we'll kind of put to the side because that's fairly straightforward. And I think that what Tobin was talking about, breaking out in a funnel standpoint, it's a great way to think about it. But even the best keywords in the world, if they have no one searching for them, then don't optimize to it. On the other hand, if a lot of people are searching, but it's a very, very high competition keyword, you might have a really long battle ahead of you. And so in that sense, you either want to be ready for it and just know it's a long journey to push into that, or you find the sweet spot, which is where we work with clients to really focus on, is the keywords that maybe have lower competition, less people are going to them, but are still highly relevant and have a lot of people going to them. So oftentimes as you're doing research, you'll find these little golden nuggets of almost areas where other competitors haven't looked. And so that's maybe the individual keyword level. There's a lot of tools to do this. Google's Keyword Planner is a good go-to resource for that. So I'd encourage you guys to take a look at that if you're interested. The only other note I'd make, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but is around something called clustering. So HubSpot, I think, is the company who kicked this off, but it was maybe 5 years ago or so. Came up with this idea of clustering. And so what it does is it's a way to organize your website. And we're going to talk about sitemaps a little bit later. And we'll dig into that. But essentially, when it says how do you know where to put these keywords, that you can strategically organize keywords and pages in this sense around specific topics. So if you're an MSP in DC, for example, you might be going after the IT services in DC keyword because you find that maybe it's somewhat competitive, but has a really high search volume and very, very relevant at the bottom of the funnel. And so you'll actually create content around that core keyword. And that's why they call it clusters. It's kind of a cluster of pages and content around things like best IT services in DC or top IT services in DC. And so little variations of that clustered together, interlinking together, will help spur forward your rankings and get you on the top of the page a little bit faster.
Yeah, so looking at the second part of that question, where to put them. I mean, I think you're right. Like, it gets back to the strategy, the sitemap, which we'll talk about. But I mean, kind of the dumb answer is kind of everywhere, right? In some ways, but typically with any kind of SEO effort, you really get one keyword, one key phrase per page. So you can't really take a keyword and stuff 6 different keywords unassociatedly on one web page. It's not going to matter. You get one page per keyword, which is why you end up with sites with 1,000 web pages, because the reality is, to cover a breadth of keywords, you need a breadth of pages. You won't be able to get IT provider Houston and IT provider for cyber and router manufacturer all in one page. Like, it won't happen. Google will recognize one keyword for that page. So you kind of have to think about pages by content, and then there's you don't need to go to this webinar to figure out how to put good keywords on a web page. That's old news in a sense, but it really depends on your sitemap strategy. Again, why when your site's built already, you've already locked yourself into some inherent keyword strategy, whether you planned it or not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Great, thank you guys. So I guess you could say keywords are pretty key. So moving on to the back end, the next question.
That's good.
What is metadata and how do I utilize it?
Wonderful. I'm gonna let Jacob tee this one up.
Sure. When people use the term metadata, it's often this like invisible hand behind the scenes, but it's not nearly as complicated as that. Usually they're referring to really the hidden elements that tell a search engine what's happening on the page. And so especially when SEO was kind of still becoming more popular and Google wasn't what it is today in the algorithm and the way it looks at websites, it was essentially almost a cheat code is probably a poor metaphor for it. But the idea was, when an image came up, as an example, Google didn't really know what that image was at the time. And so you would add things called like an alt tag to say, hey, Google, this is a picture of a happy businessman or whatever. And so it's a way to identify to Google information about your website that we as humans would be able to see immediately, but Google might have to parse out and understand context. And so this is still, I used kind of an old example of it, but this is still really important. And so you're thinking things like the title of the page, alt tags, which I already talked about. Schema is a big thing as well. Page title. So really all of these kind of hidden elements on the page are just a way to speak Google's language to say, hey, here's what I'm talking about, here's what I'm focusing on. And as Tobin was just talking about in the last question, you want to really have one primary focus. And so all of the metadata on your page should align and pool in the same direction. And so whatever keyword you're using in the title should also be the keywords around the different content that you have, and the any meta information at all should all really be pointing in that same direction.
Let's leave it at that. Sounds great.
Hey, when someone sums it all up, I guess that's all I can do. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah.
So going on to the next question, is a sitemap a necessity?
Well, I kind of alluded to this back to question 1, but it's an absolute necessity, right? And we're not talking about like a sitemap link at the bottom of your page. What I'm kind of referring to here is an intentional effort to organize your website in a sense that is organized around keywords, right? So an actual mapping of your site based on keywords. So do you need a sitemap XML? Like, do you need to submit your sitemap to Google? Like, yes, but that's 101. We're trying to go 102, 10, maybe 202 here in this webinar, a little bit more advanced stuff. So the reality is, like, yeah, you need to have an intentional structure to your website so that you can do that, pillar and clustering that Jacob was talking about. You can think about what those key focus words are. And the reality is, like, you got to hit these keywords with a sledgehammer. You can't just go broad and kind of hope the world works out in your favor in the end. I mean, if you're going after a high volume keyword, you might have 15 to 30 pieces of content specifically created to structure and support a pillar that's going for a keyword. So how do you, get top of, chip manufacturing in USA, like you get that keyword by putting a serious amount of content behind it, and that content is organized in a really smart way. So yeah, it's an absolute necessity from a technical perspective, but even just from a planning perspective. What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is just like many things in life, it's a balance, right? When you're creating a website sitemap, you're creating it for almost two different audiences. You're creating it for real people, and that in many cases should be your priority, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But you also need to create it for SEO. So oftentimes there's a lot of, one strategy at least, is to almost layer those two sitemaps on top of one another. And so when you land on the homepage of the website, we're really speaking to that prospect or that ideal customer that's coming on, to the language we're using, all the information on that page is going to be very person specific. But a thing like a blog, for example, or those clusters might not be on the navigation. And so we're going to have a high focus on an SEO standpoint. Every little dot and tittle needs to be right about those type of pages. So you're balancing two different audiences in it. And that's not to say if you're talking to the real person, not to worry about Google, or vice versa. You need to balance the two of those, but I won't get ahead of ourselves there. But that's the only other note I would make.
Great. So I guess you could say that preparation is very, very important. So coming up in this next question, we have two big keywords that we hear all the time, sort of a yin and yang relationship. Is quality or quantity more important from an SEO perspective?
What do you want to do? Good cop, bad cop here? You can start, Jacob.
All right, you could. I'm gonna give I'll give two answers here. So my honest answer is both. I would love to say in an ideal world that only quality mattered, right? But no matter how quality of a page you have, if you have one or two pages, it probably won't be ranking. Now, there are caveats to that, but big picture, that's the truth. Google's getting much better at this, but we'll still run into, unfortunately, those black hat SEO websites that have a bunch of slight variations of almost the same content. A user will jump on there and see that this is really bad content, this doesn't make any sense, but Google might like it. Now, Google's getting way better at that, so it's becoming less and less prevalent over time. But when you're creating content, just like everyone would say, quality is going to be way more important. Because if you have quantity but not quality, great, you have a bunch of people, you're able to maybe trick somehow Google into pulling people on your site. But if it's not quality, they'll never turn into leads anyway. And so you have to keep the kind of end goal in mind when you're doing this. Because even if quantity was it, you still need quality or else you won't get leads. And SEO is all about creating leads and generating awareness there. So that's kind of my thought on that. I have one other thought, but maybe I'll let Tobin, maybe you add on to that.
Well, I think I think we're not going to be very different here. I mean, I would say it's a both and, right? It's the same thing. So you kind of have both problems. Is that one amazing post is not going to do it, and as 60 unamazing posts might bring traffic. Once they get there, they're going to bounce and not find the content engaging, right? It's like we used to talk about writing for robots and writing for people. Like you can write for robots pretty easily and trick the robots. But you can't trick people. Like they'll be able to read the content and know it's just stuffed or it's just fluff in that sense. So you do have to get to a place of kind of balancing that. So I call it a both and scenario with that. So yeah, that's really where you are. So it's a teed up question to help you think about it. But you must press into quality, and you absolutely have to press into quantity. None of them themselves are going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
Only caveat I throw in on that, honestly, though, is if you're going after a very low competition key phrase, right? If you're going after something that's a very low competition, a local provider for something maybe, or a very niche technology, you wouldn't need as much quantity because the amount of competition. The more competition, the more validation. I mean, Google's looking for what? They're looking for relevance, and so relevance is somewhat calculated by the amount of content you have on a given topic.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them my my pulpit for a moment here and vent. So add to it if you want to, Tobin.
We only have an hour here, so.
I know. I'll be quick with it. This question kind of hints at the idea of trying to trick Google, and without even going into like black hat tactics, even really straightforward SEO strategies. Like the mindset to have when you're approaching SEO is not how can I trick Google into sending people to my website. Google and you as a business and us as business people are going after the same goal. So we are trying to create an experience for a user that is high quality, that delivers our expertise, that will convert because our services that we offer are really good and helpful and useful, and people want to pay, and they improve the lives of the people that we serve. Google is just trying to figure out what businesses are doing that and what businesses are poor and not serving customers well, and what experiences are bad on a website. And so at the end of the day, are there tricks you can use to get Google to send more traffic to your page? Yes, but the mindset you need to approach this at is just providing a really good experience, right? If you're focusing on getting people who are interested in whatever topic it might be, then create content around that topic, create valuable content around that topic, create content where people stay on the page and they read through it and they click on links and somewhere that other resources are going to link to because it's that valuable. So have in mind the same goal that Google has. Don't try to trick Google into showing your page above others by some tricky little tactic. Just create better content than your competitors, and they are naturally trying their best to do that as well.
Yeah, and I'll grab that mic and say the same thing. I mean, it's not foreign for us to get asked questions like that, to be pushed a little bit to kind of exploring, the quote unquote black hat tactics. I mean, I've been doing SEO since SEO existed, right? The reality is it's always the white hat that wins the day. Like Google's on a mad hunt to shut down black hat. Like you might be a winner for a week or two, but then they're going to figure it out and you move on. And talk to many business owners who've had to pay for that. Like they had to change their business name, they had to go to new domains. I mean, they shut you down. They shut you down hard. So it's just never been a profitable walk to be on the dark side, so to speak, of SEO. Just make good content, make it relevant, organize it well, and you'll win. You'll win for sure.
Yep. See, I did it in under an hour.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Great, thank you guys. Jacob, we've almost run out of time, but I guess we'll go to a few more. So shifting to sort of a different part of content, something that we hear come up all the time, and I'm sure that you ask clients repeatedly for more testimonials. Now, how important are reviews or testimonials to have on your site?
Yeah. So again, we as New North typically operate in a B2B tech context for digital marketing. So we have a very kind of unique view on reviews. I mean, there's certain sites like Clutch or Capterra. There's certain aspects that exist. Or Google Maps, or your Google rating in that sense. SEO speaking, like there's a whole other world of reviews in terms of customer experience, reputation management, things we do there. But if we talk about just SEO, I mean, Google is pretty explicit about the fact that businesses with greater reviews and better ratings rank better, right? They're just explicit about that in some of their documents. Same thing with your other sites. I mean, most review sites now are gameable in the sense of being able to pay for listings and sponsorships and rankings, right? It's the whole point is to make money in that. So not as democratic, but they're definitely important, right? So some level of reputation management is needed. But you need to make a concerted effort, especially when you think about Google specifically, that you have strong reviews there to be able to maintain, especially if you do some kind of geographic basis in your business. If you're more software related and maybe it's not quite as big, you look at the other sites. But if you have any kind of geographic basis to your business, then you want to do it. Not even just from an SEO perspective, but even from an HR perspective and acquisition perspective. I mean, you want to have a good business people like. So I think it is important to have an active campaign to acquire those and maintain a good one, because Google does calculate it to some degree in there.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll add on is there's often this secondary question that if we say Yeah, reviews and testimonials are really important. The follow-up question is, all right, well, how can I get those reviews? And the answer to that, and oftentimes the first reaction is just to send an email blast out asking for reviews. And then when people don't answer that, you bait them into doing it. And so you promise them gifts. And that'll work sometimes. That's a fine strategy. There's nothing wrong with that. But the most replicable way to get reviews is to ask in the appropriate timing. And so if, for example, you run a business where you do like multiple projects, then set up automation or set up a process where after those projects are done, you request a review. And then you'll just get continuous reviews kind of coming through as you do business, just on a normal day-to-day basis, instead of every 6 months having to spin up some huge campaign to get it done. So that's the only other thing I'd add.
Yeah, fair.
Great, great. Now shifting to the next question. After realizing the importance of SEO, is it more helpful to update existing content or to start from scratch? Now I know we've touched on some of these aspects, talking about sitemaps and other things, but Tobin, do you want to take this one away?
Sure. The answer here is it has a lot more to do with your budget than strategy. Content creation has an expense, whether you're doing it yourself internally, that's time, or you're outsourcing it, or you're farming your content out, etc. You've got a cost there. So that's definitely one factor that I would consider. It also would look at the quality of your content. I mean, we've come into scenarios with hundreds of blogs and they were all pretty bad. And by bad, I might say they were like 300 keywords, or sorry, 300 words long or 500 words long. They didn't really understand the anatomy of a proper blog post in terms of tagging and backlinks and linking and interlinking and things like that. So they had massive amounts of content but no strategy to it. So I think, in some sense, not giving the depends answer, but there is a little bit of a depends kind of challenge. I would always say, though, if you've made any kind of effort with content, it's usually easier, faster, more beneficial to look at any existing rankings you have and start working from there, because it's already indexed, it's already got some quality to it, it's already got some oomph behind it. Ultimately, though, you're going to be building more content either way because you don't have the rankings you desire, right? So you're not ranking for what you want now. So if you want to rank, you may have a great homepage, you may have a good product page, but ultimately you're going to be adding content. I don't know if you're necessarily going to start from scratch, but I would try to avoid in all cases starting from scratch unless you're changing your business model. But that's my thought. Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. It depends on what you mean by start from scratch, right? Like Tobin said, you really want to avoid just getting rid of all your content and piling on a new one because you're starting over, and you oftentimes do have some keywords you're already winning at if you've been creating content. So it's just a matter of finding those and leveraging them correctly. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're just starting this journey of prioritizing SEO, there's a temptation to do a gigantic project and to create 60, 80 pages of content and then dump them all in at once. Oftentimes those will get stalled. There's nothing that takes longer when we're working with clients, at least, than getting content, because you want to get it right, you want to nail it down, you want to make sure all the information's right, and there's a lot of good reasons, and it should be a big focus, but that can slow you down significantly. And so sometimes it makes more sense to iteratively work into it, to say, hey, we're going to do 5 pages now, write them, then get them live, and then here are the next 5. That way you're not spending 3 months creating content and none of it's been live. You can start getting the benefits of it earlier on.
Great. That's very helpful. Now, staying in the realm of content, something that we've seen gaining some traction recently is video content. So, Jacob, if you want to take the lead on this question, should people be doing video?
Yes. And just for okay.
Sorry, I ruined your joke.
I was just going to disagree with you to make it more interesting for the viewers, but I cannot disagree with you on that statement. So go ahead. Sorry.
No. The answer is yes. Video is way more engaging. It's really valuable just from a Google's and search engines prioritization of it. People will sit and watch a video in a way that they won't sit there and read content. And so it's the same way, really, yeah, the answer is yes, it's really valuable. You want to do it right. So make sure there's little things like transcripts, making sure the title, description are lined up, surrounding that with relevant content. So if you create a video, number one, try getting it on your website so people are interacting with their website and pulling into different other pages, but surround that video with relevant content that makes sense to just pull people deeper into the funnel. So that's a basic answer, but yeah, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the big picture here is, yeah, you should be doing video. It's a pretty straightforward thing to think about. I mean, let me kind of give you some thoughts here. I wrote some notes down. The thought is here's a stat coming from, let's see, Statista here, that they're expected by 2022 that online videos are going to make up more than 82% of the internet traffic as a whole. Right? Think about what goes on the internet, video. 78% of people watch online videos every week. 55% view them every day. 55% of online videos every day. Of people. I mean, it's pretty nuts. That's Social Media Weekly. And studies show 54% of more consumers want to see more video content. Right? So SEO, even aside for a minute, I mean, video is a predominant channel for any marketers, even B2B. B2B, we get a lot of scuffing on that, like, well, we're not Coke, or we're not, a consumer brand. Doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. People's expectations are there. So I think, yes, you absolutely do video. I would also introduce this idea of like what I call zero rank. So I think that's something to think about is, so rank zero. So rank zero is this idea that there's elements now in Google, and I'm gonna talk about this a little bit later, I think, in the future of SEO side. But rank zero is this term for all these things now that are starting to pop up above the natural search listing, right? It used to be this thing called Snack Pack, which was like the 3 businesses that were closest to you, and you search something like new tires, right? There's 3 tire shops, and then it showed you the listings down below, and that's called a Snack Pack. Well, that's getting totally, expanded by Google. Google's owning more of the top of the search result, more and more. It used to be just ads. Now it's ads plus Snack Pack, and that's ads plus maps plus a video plus now an answers. Like, there's so many of these rank zero elements that they're adding into their search. And so video is one of those pieces of content where we're kind of all scrapping for this, order at the bottom of Google page, but realize videos are getting pulled in above it. Paid ads are getting pulled in, maps are getting pulled in, all kinds of other elements are being pulled into this rank zero spot. And so it's a worthy strategy. I mean, we've been preaching it for 2-3 years now of like, you may be a, cybersecurity Cincinnati, right? It's one of your big keywords. Well, you can fight all day long for those paid ads that cost you about $37 a click, but you could be the #1 video in the video tab, where people are going, right? They're going to that tab. So the reality is, you think so myopically about the natural listing or the text listing. There's videos, there's maps, there's all kinds of other elements in the Google search that Google is factoring in. Now, we've seen sites where, during a redesign or during a shift where they lost 30% of traffic, realizing it was from the images search in Google, right? Because people are finding traffic through images, through infographics, things like that. So I think this question kind of like starts the conversation towards what is search, right? What is we saying? It's just keywords, typing keywords in the top and getting a link that you click. That's one thing. That's not really where that's search as we all grew up on it kind of thing, but it's changing now. It's changing pretty quickly because we're not just typing anymore. We're talking, right? We're talking to Google. We're talking to Siri. We're talking to them. So all that stuff's like dynamically changing, but I'll put a pin in it for that and say video yes for now.
Great. Okay, moving on. Something we've touched a little bit on so far, but how long does it take to see results from SEO? I'll let you guys choose who goes first here.
Yeah, this is a really common question we get. And I have 2 answers of which people never like either of. but it's the truth. The first one is I'll be honest. It takes time oftentimes, right? Like you are not the only person competing for this. And oftentimes you are not the person investing the most in it either. And so with that reality, just like any other sort of bidding model, which is really what Google is, it's going to take time to build that ranking, to build that trust, to, and for lack of a better term, convince Google that you have the best content and you have the best expertise on whatever the topic might be. Really, it all depends on the keyword. Sometimes it can be just 3 months. Sometimes it can be a lot longer than that for some really, really tough big picture keywords. And then the other piece I'd say is one of the biggest benefits is that 3, 6, 9, 12 months even sometimes pays off in spades once you lock it in. Because getting a ranking is one thing, keeping a ranking is much lower energy and much lower resource. And so I've worked with many clients where it took quite some time to get that first ranking because it was highly competitive, competing with companies 3-5 times as big as they are, investing way more into it. But once you beat them and once you lock it in, you're not paying anything. The only other note I make, which is a strategy we often make, is we don't want to invest 6 months of budget into something and see 0 results. One tactic that we use is to almost subsidize SEO efforts with paid efforts. So paid can be a great way to validate a certain direction search, because you also don't want to go one direction with the keyword and find out that the traffic doesn't behave well, or for whatever reason it wasn't a good direction to go in. You just wasted 6 months. Well, paid allows you to shortcut that, test something out, bring traffic to the page with that intention, and just to measure the results, see what happens. And so that oftentimes will essentially set a flag in the sand. We'll go after that from a paid standpoint, validate, get some wins, learn lessons, watch behavior, and then can work the slower but more steady route on an organic standpoint to then lock those rankings down and then go after the next target. So just keep paid, grab it, lock it in with SEO, get the next one with paid and lock it in with the SEO. So that's a couple of thoughts on that.
It sounds like a strategy if you're really impatient.
That's good.
All right, Colin started it.
I saw you laugh and I knew something was coming.
Yeah. Colin started it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we'll move on. But yeah, that's a great addition to pushing in. But I mean, it's an unknown, right? And our clients hate hearing that. Everyone hates hearing that. It's an unknown how long something's going to take. The factors that go into it are your effort, like how much content you're creating, how much effort you're putting into it, the competition that already exists, and just Google too, like how fast they're willing to make updates and get other competition going at it too. So, I mean, we've had campaigns where we've put out 40 pieces of content in 30 days to a website, and it's still took like 45 days for everything to like register, right? So it's not like Google's sitting there saying thank you as you like put content out. Like it's scraping your site and kind of making adjustments and thinking and kind of processing. So there's 2 methods, like the BAM, hit it with a bunch of content, kind of shake it up a bit, or steady drip. Both are valid because none of them are really gonna move the needle that much faster in some cases, and individual details of projects would validate that. But so yeah, I think you're looking, if you're spending, let's say, $10,000 a month on SEO specifically, like with content and image development, things like that, you'd move significantly quicker if you're creating an article a week, for example. Like 10,000 obviously would be a considerable amount of content. You're probably talking 40, 50 pieces of content, right? But if you're looking at 4 a blog a week and a white paper every quarter, it's going to take you a while. It might take you like a year to get a ranking out there, but like Jacob said, it moves quickly once you get there, and it's harder to unseat you. So the race is to the top. Once you get there, it's a little easier to defend King of the Hill style your mark. You still need to create content, but you can hold it a bit easier. So it's another depends answer, but I would say it's about how fast you want to get there. And I think the other part of that question, is what I usually get it is usually based on like the question of like, what's it going to cost me to get there? Because the value, the thought they're thinking is, how much do I need to spend to get the ranking? And they think of it in a shorter time, like, okay, I'm going to invest, you know, $30,000 to get this #1 ranking, and then I'm going to get, you know, 500 visitors to my site, and I'm hoping to get $30,000 right then, like in payback, right? I'm going to get leads and payoff. But like Jacob said, like, this is reality. So once you get there, you're talking that, you know, $60,000 or $30,000 investment is now almost perpetual, right? So the reality is, you know, you look at CPL, like the cost per lead, it's just a chart going down over time, right? So you invest in SEO. So the problem is you got to pay it all. It's all down. It's all due at start, right? It's like you put it all down, and then that investment comes back, and your cost per lead actually goes down over time. So that's the biggest. That's what's behind this question a lot. I think for people when they ask us this is, what's this going to cost me to get there? But they don't necessarily have a long-term vision or understanding of what's going to happen once we get there. And when you get the right piece of content, I mean, there's certain clients of ours and even ourselves, I mean, there's pieces of content that have brought in like millions of dollars. Like it's certain blogs or certain articles, but it's the content around it. It's all this kind of structure and whatnot. So they may have invested, you know, 30, 50K in getting all these SEO and SEO efforts to get to these things. And now those things are just dropping leads and, you know, details that way. So absolutely works, absolutely is critical. But think of it in the two phases, like the build up and then the payoff. And the payoff is usually incredibly longer than the build up phase.
Yep.
Great. Coming up next is another question that we get all the time, and it's, you know, something that most business owners have to deal with. A lot of them don't want to or aren't able to, you know, do all of this work and focus on the aspect of their business. So if I outsource SEO, what should I be measuring to ensure that it's being done well?
I'll let you answer this one first, Tobin. I have a couple of thoughts.
Well, I'll just straight up ignore the first part of the question because it doesn't really matter whether you outsource it or not. You should measure it all the same. But it's helpful, obviously, if you're doing from a management perspective, how you want to manage your SEO staff or vendors or whatever. You know, the challenge with SEO is you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to do with SEO? Well, you're trying to build qualified traffic, right? So I think there's two measurements there. There's qualification and there's traffic, pure traffic. So I think you should look at ranking. You should look at volume. There's so many tools now, whether you're using Ahrefs or you're using your Google Search Console, but you're gonna be measuring the sheer volume you're getting from search, right? That should be ever increasing. As the volume gets to a certain point, then you're going to want to start looking at certain levels of attribution back to keywords. Like that's a pie in the sky for some companies, but some companies have it figured out of, okay, here's the keywords, here's the blogs, here's the pages that have highest content attribution to close deals. So you can look at that. So that's the big strategic part is, how is this content paying off? How's this SEO work paying off from that perspective? Or, organic search, what's it coming through in leads? That's a big picture, but I would overall and if you're just starting out, if you just kind of watch this webinar and then go get things going, you look at your number of rankings in terms of associated traffic, right? The right keywords, the right traffic. Is your traffic increasing at a certain rate based on what you perceive the expenditure to be and the value to be? And you're always increasing traffic, increasing rankings. Really, anything less than third position is pointless from SEO perspective. So it's all just numbers until it actually means something from a traffic perspective. So I think you're looking at rankings in terms of where you rank for a certain keyword, the traffic you're generating from that, from Search Console kind of stuff, and then ultimately, what's that traffic doing for you? Which keywords are really paying off? Jacob, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the only other thing I'd add to that is there's almost like a stepped approach to it. So if you're starting out and you haven't done any SEO before, you get a benchmark, and then you're going to start measuring success based on like being able to hit a couple really long tail keywords. So you're going to look at the actual ranking of the keyword. as you start getting a couple of those, then you're going to want to start looking at the traffic, as Tobin mentioned, that's coming to the website. And not just volume. Volume's a big piece of it, but you also want to look at behavior. How does the behavior of the traffic that is landing on the website from organic compared to the other sources? So that will, in many ways, validate the strategy that you put together in the first place. Did you pick the right keywords, right? So if you picked keywords that you thought were good, and you see people come to the website and a couple keywords aren't behaving, and they're not staying on the page as long, they're not going into as many pages, start thinking through it, start Googling that term. You might figure out that there's something you didn't realize and you missed in the strategy side of it. So there's a lot of different ways to measure it, but as Tobin mentioned, you measure it the exact same way you would if you did it yourself, in the data that is pointing towards success, and at the end of the day, in the revenue, frankly, that it can bring in for you. So yeah, that's the only other thing I'd add.
Great, thank you guys. Now, I know I've phrased this next question a little strangely, but this goes into our future predictions for SEO. Jacob, let's have you take the lead on this one.
All right. So there's a couple different things. I think first of all, as we talked about this a little bit earlier, as Google gets better, and search engines, I just say Google because it's so much of it, gets better at really determining what pages are better, just sticking from an on-page standpoint. We're going to start focusing less on the tips and tricks for winning at SEO and focus more on the tips and tricks of making users like our website and like our content. So there's a shift that I think is has and should already be there, but will continue to go, where we have less of a view in Google's algorithm and the complications in it. Google engineers themselves are understanding less and less about how Google's algorithm works because it's so complicated and has a lot of machine learning and things in it. So as that happens, and this black box becomes even more unknowable, all we're going to see is the people that like our content the best, or the experience I give to a customer results in better rankings. And so I'm just going to give as good of an experience as I possibly can. The other note I would make is a broadening in what search means. So we often think about it as opening up a desktop and typing something in, and mobile and typing something in, and then voice changes things as well. So the way I speak into my phone is different than the search terms I type in. And so that is going to change things as well. And then even pushing forward into using things like all the smart devices, when you Google things, like the way people search is always evolving. When I'll end it here, but when people first started using search engines, if they were looking to buy a couch, they would type in couch, and then they would find solutions for it. But as time evolved, they started getting real specific, and then they started getting more specific. And then now language is becoming more natural. So if you listen to a 9-year-old talk to your Google Home, she's going to talk to it like she does her friend. Whereas if you hear a 55-year-old talk to a Google Home, it's going to sound like a little bit different than that, I'll say. But so just the way people Google and search is changing in different channels and modes is maybe another piece of that. But I'm droning now. So Tobin,
I know you've been chomping at the bit to answer this one.
No, sure. Yes, and this is just fascinating stuff that's going on out there with Google, and our team has a lot of different thoughts about these. But the biggest stuff from Google is going to be their new algorithm, right? So they've talked about this new algorithm called MUM. Is basically going to replace BERT, which is the existing one, but MUM means multi-task united model. And basically, it's a natural language processor that uses AI. So what it means is that, as Google's been dealing with this, and Jacob mentioned it a minute ago, and we talked about it, we started Googling on a web page, but Googling has evolved to voice, and now Googling is evolving into all kinds of things, hand gestures and all kinds of different mediums. So, for example, what MUM's going to be able to do, it's about 1,000 times more powerful based on Google's own estimates. But can you imagine even just searching with an image? You could say, I would like to buy this, and you drag an image into Google and it can find it for you from a search perspective with photos. So it's extremely powerful. So the algorithm itself is just evolving so quickly that we're coming into a situation where multimedia, you can search with videos potentially. Like, I saw this video, where is this in the world, right? And Google being able to find it because they've got all these picture images and mappings and things like that. So it's gonna really blow our minds as we get there, and so it does impact us. I mean, you're still gonna have to work on, you know, getting better. When we talk about these zero rank page position pieces, it's gonna get more and more important. I mean, the natural listing or the text listing is a default stance. The question now is like, what are you doing for zero rank pieces? So in 2022, I think having a good content strategy, but also having an actual search zero rank strategy will be really important. So how are you going to get into Google Answers? How are you going to get into, you know, good video ranks or the maps themselves? So it's beyond this kind of passive create content and let Google figure it out kind of place. I think brands and companies should be thinking about actually working in Google's tools and in its piece to create content and to supply it in a way that actually works those rankings. I think also, you know, as I mentioned, the video conversation, just being more broadly adept at search for your company, right? They say there's 4 or 5 tabs at the top of Google, and there's shopping, there's images, there's videos, there's maps, all those things. Questioning yourself and saying, how do we rank for things that are relevant to us for these tabs, right? So do you rank for videos for your content? Do you rank for images? Images was honestly like a joke when they first started out there. It's like, I can search for cat and I can find cat images, what do you do? But what if I'm searching for something else? I'm looking for images, right? How does that impact, you know, your product? Could you put your product or you put your service out there with someone looking for certain things in your space? So again, it's all about strategy and alignment, but thinking about all those pieces. And then lastly, you know, as Google continues to push things, I mean, I remember Mobilegeddon, which happened, you know, a few years ago, and Google was kind of moving towards this mobile first thing, and now they've just continued to push that. So now there's these new core page vitals. You can look it up, Google's new core page vitals. These are all meaningful data points that Google's doing, like first paint and you know, some other critical elements in terms of how your page loads from a JavaScript perspective. So they're increasing their algorithm, but they're also just scrutinizing websites more and more and more, and kind of pushing for sites to conform to rank well. So again, the push for content is, you know, a decade old at this point. Yes, you got to do it. It's table stakes, but the really competitive higher end SEO stuff is now about strategy. It's about organization. It's about having incredibly optimized website experiences. You know, you got AMP, mobile, now these core page vitals. There's so much technically happening with websites now. Like, I just don't, in a sense, I don't know how more intense it can get. It kind of feels like I'm aging, like how crazier can it get? But it seems like it's just going to get crazier and crazier. And the cost to rank is no longer just the cost of content. It's the cost of the website, the optimization, all of these things as you continue to go. And in a sense, they're creating a game, as I've been saying for decades. I mean, Google created the website market in a sense, right? Like, they've managed it. Before it was like, it was a nice to have, but now it's search rankings. There's so much business being transacted and determined over the online channel of search. They just keep moving the stake. They have to, otherwise it gets stale. So they're just making it, in a sense, they're giving us a new hoop to jump through in Google and search. So 2022, I would say, as you think about your future search strategies, you got to think technical level, like just really getting scrutinizing your page speed, all these core page vitals, think about content, video, and how you rank on these other pieces, and then just preparing yourself for, you know, really what is a good, strong strategy, and where are you going to set up camp? What keywords do you really want to focus on, making that a big part of where you're going to go? But that's what I see a bit happening here in the future.
Terrific. Yeah. Coming up on our favorite part of our webinars, the audience questions. Now, I've already had a slew of questions come in, so I will start looking through these. We only have a few minutes left, so we're not going to be able to hit all of them. Here's a good one. This says, I hired someone to implement SEO mostly through blog posts and other content, and it was working great. But my organic and direct traffic have dropped significantly over the past few months. What should I do?
I would say if you hired someone to write content and your organic traffic dropped, then they didn't do great. And that's kind of one of the measurables that we were talking about a little bit earlier, is measure them not by effort or goodwill, but measure them by the results that they get. And make sure to give them time, because it takes time to do that. But yeah, I guess that's my frank answer.
Yeah, and that's a good one too. I think in some ways, and you know, again, I don't want to be the guy in the middle of everything, you know, with this, but your assumption there is that there's something to do with your content, right? You could be falling in rankings for multiple reasons. You could be falling because of malicious links. You could have actually a virus on your website. I mean, there could be all kinds of things that are contributing to your drop in rank. I think your first thing is to explore that and see what's happening. You know, as individual pages that are ranking, are you losing traffic? What pages are you losing traffic from, right? Did you get beat out on certain keywords? Because again, you may be losing traffic from a page you could care less about, right? So, I mean, we've gone into many engagements with clients and we've actually brought their traffic down at the start because they had just, they're living a lie. Like they have, you know, 2,000 visitors, but 1,500 of them are to some blog post about where to buy party hats, like that some of their employees wrote. Like it's just insanity when it comes to SEO. You can rank for all kinds of things. So I would spend a much deeper investigation before you go with the guillotine around your office trying to figure out who's going to pay for this. But I think you should really analyze it and see what is the drop and where's it coming from, what pages are responsible for it, and then look at your content strategy and see if there's something there. But not quite enough information to answer that.
Yeah, I would actually, I'll approach it with more nuance than I did the first time. One other item, one other item to look at is search volume. I've run into that before too. When you're ranking for something, keep pushing it forward. But if fewer people are searching it, you're going to get fewer people coming to your site, and so you need to adjust at that point. So I think, Toby, my aggressive answer is bring down the hammer. But the nuanced, thoughtful, yeah, the nuanced, thoughtful answer is figure out why that's happening. Because you're right, maybe it's volume, maybe it's something deeper in your website that has nothing to do with content. As you said earlier, content is a huge piece of SEO, but there's more to it. So yeah, I think that's totally right.
And it gets into console. I know we got not a lot of time. We should get one more question in here, but you know, yeah, look at console. Look at, you know, those tools that allow you to see it. I mean, we see seasonality in so many of our clients in the B2B space, where we could see a 25% seasonality shift in keyword volume searches. I mean, they try to get business in July, like 1 month, like it's vacation month. People searches drop considerably. September they spike up again. So depending on when that 2 months ago was, kind of thing. I mean, if you have something that's really seasonal, I mean, it could be the fact that no one's searching, right? The best thing about that, the thing about this, SEO is like setting a trap. Like if there's no fish, or, you know, like net fishing, like you're setting a net, you're setting a bait in the water. There's no fish in the stream. Doesn't matter how good your net is. Like there's just not that much volume. So you definitely got to look at the top line volume of what's out there from Google's perspective, and it does shift.
Great. And as we approach the end of our webinar, I'll read one more question from the chat. Here's one. I've heard page loading speed is super important. What page speed score should I aim for?
0. I mean, what else are you aiming for? You're aiming for the fastest possible page speed you can get. So, I mean, there isn't like, you know, oh, you're fine with 1 point. I mean, that's kind of nuancy. I mean, ultimately trying to get it down as fast as you can. I mean, Google's page speed gives you like a red, green, you know, red, yellow, green kind of thing. If you're looking at something like that. But if you're looking at like global speed, I mean, honestly, like the faster the better, right? Like how can you eliminate assets? How can you make it clean? But to Jacob's point earlier, I'll let him tee it up with that. It's like you balance technical load with user experience.
Yeah,
Jacob.
yeah, there is that. If you're looking for a number, there's a 2.5 seconds is often a really commonly used one, but what does load mean too? Because when you get into the technical side of it, it gets a little bit more complicated. There's like the LCP, so largest content paint. There's FID, CL. There's a bunch of name an acronym. But there's a bunch of ways to measure speed, like above the fold or beneath the fold, till everything's done, or until just the visual elements are done. So there's a lot of different ways to measure speed. But yeah, at the end of the day, Tobin's right. Make it as fast as you can possibly make it. If something's slowing down your site, get rid of it. Not just from an SEO standpoint, but from a search standpoint as well.
Great. And with my 5 seconds left to talk, there is a link that will pop up for feedback. Please provide us some. And thank you so much for joining us. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the content.